Yeah. Good afternoon, all of you. Respected Vice Chancellor, Professor K. Sitaram Rao Garu, Registrar, Director Academic, other functionaries of the university for extending their cooperation and support in conducting the webinar series. And I welcome you all on behalf of the Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University and my own behalf. Friends, very good afternoon. And this webinar series we have started from December 17th onwards through 21st February 2022. There are 9 webinar series, and out of which 5 we already completed. And today we are with the webinar title is called Impact of Pandemic on Indian Economy, a Sectoral Analysis, for which we have invited 2 resource persons from the external, Professor S.V. Satyanarayana, retired professor, Usmania University, Hyderabad, and Nanda Kishore, a corporate trainer and financial advisor, and Dr. Rabindranath Solomon, Head Department of Commerce from B.R. Ambedkar Open University. And I also welcome Professor Y.S. Kiranmai, Adjunct Professor, Department of Business Management, Faculty of Commerce, Dr. B.R.A. OU, Hyderabad. And also welcome the participants, research scholars, faculty members, students, and other friends. A warm welcome to all of you. And today we are going to discuss about the topic called the impact of pandemic on Indian economy, a sectoral analysis, for which we have invited eminent speakers, as I mentioned earlier. And now I request Madam to present the resource person of this program. Professor Y.S. Kiranmai will present the resource persons.
Thank you very much, Professor Paul. It's my pleasure to introduce the resource persons, and incidentally about some topics, we organized a webinar on a similar title, that is again impact of the pandemic. But in that webinar, we presented an analysis from international
business point of view.
International business point of view. And today we are confining our presentation on impact of this pandemic on Indian economy. And as I said, Indian resource persons, Professor Secretary, Mr. Kishore, and our own colleague, Dr. Rabindranath, are participating in the seminar as resource persons. First of all, let me introduce Professor S.V. Satyanarayana Garu, one of the good friend of ours. Dr. S.V. Satyanarayana, he is a retired professor of Commerce Department, Usmania University, and served the university for about 35 years. He received MCom, MPhil, PhD degrees from Usmania University. Apart from teaching, the other responsibilities discharged by Professor Secretary in the university included, he acted as OSD, Officer on Special Duty, to the Vice Chancellor of Usmania University. He's also acted as Chairman, Board of Studies, Head Department of Commerce, and Dean of the Faculty. And he was also the Research Director, Research and Monitoring Wing for Essential Commodities in Andhra Pradesh for 4 years at the behest of the government. He received ICSSR, Teacher Fellowship, to pursue PhD. Sir guided 22 PhDs and 8 MPhils, and presently he is guiding 8 PhD scholars. He published more than 40 papers in national and international journals, and a few of them in Scopus and ABDC research journals. He published 12 books and also edited a number of books. He was awarded a major research project and 3 minor research projects by UGC. He organized 2 national seminars, 2 international seminars, and conducted 10 workshops. Sir delivered lectures on invitation in several universities. His scholars are holding important positions in various reputed institutions in India and also abroad. He received the Best Academic of the Year award twice from the Indian Commerce Association, the Best Teacher Award from the Telangana government, and also he is bestowed with the Teacher of the Teachers by Shivashivani Institute of Management. Thank you very much for Professor Satyanarayana, sir, for being with us today. And the next resource person is Dr. Kishore N.K. Dr. Kishore is a corporate finance professional with 25 years of experience. His qualifications include PhD in finance. He did MBA, MCom, LLM, and ACS, that's company secretary. He is a rank holder in his MCom, MBA, LLM, and PhD courses. He has about 25 years of work experience in project finance, PPP projects, corporate finance, venture capital, credit, legal, accounting, and HR. He received Best CFO awards from several organizations, including Economic Times Now Awards. The professional positions of Dr. Kishore include advisory board member for Oxford University, Trade Tower, board advisor for startups, financial mentor at Startup Grind, the world's largest startup company platform, board of studies member at SSIM, that is Social Institute of Management. Dr. Kishore delivered expert talks and case studies in various locations within India and abroad, including at Singapore, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Malaysia, Thailand, South Korea, etc. He has the privilege of delivering sessions for civil servants, commissioners, senior government officials, officers of regulatory organizations, bankers, chartered accountants, company secretaries, and so many. His target group is very wide. He published a number of articles in leading publications, guided more than 500 research projects, and participated in many conferences. Dr. Kishore traveled very widely in India and abroad, and his hobbies include reading, research, mentoring, and traveling. It is very evident from his profile. And Dr. Rabindranath Sarman, he is our own colleague in the department. Dr. Sarman is with us since almost the last 10 years. He did his MCOM, MPhil, and also PhD. Now he is working as head department of commerce, and previously he worked as one of the additional controller of examinations of the university. So thank you very much all the resource persons for accepting our invitation and taking part in the webinar. Now, after the presentation of all the resource persons, the session will be open for 10 to 15 minutes for interaction with the participants. And then a feedback clip will be given to the participants so that after submitting the feedback, they can download the certificates. So thank you very much, Pawan. Now I wish you to start the session.
Yeah, Professor S. Satyanarayana will talk about the session on sectoral analysis, because we can divide the topic into 5-6 sectors. And Professor Satyanarayana will be talking about service and financial sector, particularly MSME. Now I request Professor S. Satyanarayana to continue the session. Professor S. Satyanarayana.
Thank you, Madam, for your nice introduction. And thank you, Professor Anand Pawar, for providing me an opportunity to interact with the participants on impact of COVID-19, that is pandemic, on the Indian economy. So I also thank Dr. Ravindranath for assisting me in sharing the PowerPoint presentation and in coordinating the program. And I also thank Mr. Kishore for being with us today and sharing his valuable thoughts on the impact of the pandemic on the Indian economy. He is going to discuss about the impact on specific sectors, and I will give a general view of the impact of the COVID-19 on the Indian economy on various sectors, and how we have taken this as an opportunity to boost the economy. These things we will discuss, and I will take about 45 to 50 minutes, and 10 minutes we will devote for discussion. And if the participants, they raise some issues, then our discussion will be much more fruitful. So I thank you, Mr. Dr. Ravindranath. You please go to the next slide. Will you please go to the next slide?
Yeah, I have gone, sir. I have gone to the next slide.
Okay. Okay. It is there, but only first slide is visible on the screen. That's why I'm asking. Okay. So you are able to see the second slide on the screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I don't bother about the slides which are visible to me on the screen, and I will go on talking about the things. Okay?
Yes, sir.
So one of the important impacts of the pandemic on Indian economy or in the global economy in general and on the Indian economy in particular is it pushed almost all the countries into recession. And this recession is one of the severe recessions we faced after World War II. And the world economy, in fact, contracted by 3.5%. In fact, we expected that there will be an increase in a growth in the world economy, but instead of 3.4% growth, expected growth, the world economy contracted by 3.5%. That means about 7% loss to the entire globe because of the pandemic we witnessed in the world GDP. And almost all the countries they faced the downturn. There was no exception except China, which showed some positive growth. Many countries, almost all the countries of the world, they showed negative growth rates during the pandemic. And the poorer parts of the world, they had more impact of the pandemic than the rich countries, because we have seen how the even masks were not available in the poor countries. And India, we have seen how we suffered for want of sanitizers, masks, etc., etc. So why we are discussing about the contraction of GDP, and what is the why should the GDP has any significance for the economy? So particularly some of the students may be attending the webinar, so they must know the relationship between GDP and the poverty. So any growth in GDP, so many studies have shown that any growth in GDP is related to poverty reduction. Any increase in GDP will result in poverty reduction. This is proved by many research studies. But because of the reduction in GDP, the poverty levels in the world increased. So in 2020, instead of reduction in poverty to 7.9%, it increased to 9.4%. That means about 1.5 billion people, that means 150 crore people of the world, they were pushed into poverty by the pandemic. In 2020, the real gross domestic product of that means GDP of our country, India, it contracted to 7.9, contracted by 7.9, about 8% compared to the previous year. Of course, the revised estimates show that the contraction was a little less than what was calculated earlier. But anyhow, so minus 8% reduction in GDP is not a small thing, and it has a tremendous negative impact on the economy. And but one silver line is the rural economy was less affected in India than the urban economy, and about 50 to 60% population, they live in rural areas. So that is the reason why we have experienced a little bit less severity as compared to many African and other countries. So this is one of the things which we need to understand. And agriculture economy also saved the country, and it grew by about 3.4%, while all the other sectors of the economy, they contracted. Agriculture showed some resilience, and it showed some positive growth during the pandemic. And in India, the number of poor people increased by almost 7.5 crores during 2020. So that was the impact of the COVID on Indian economy as far as the poverty and GDP are concerned. So next thing which has negatively impacted the country was inflation. So inflation is one of the dangerous things, and beyond a particular point, any increase in prices will negatively impact the standard of living of people, particularly the poor people, because a major part of the income of the poor people is spent on food and other necessities. So any increase in prices, that will have tremendous negative impact on the standard of living of particularly poor people. And because of the lockdown, so lockdown in India was more severe as compared to many other nations of the world, and it has affected the price. It resulted in increase in the prices of several goods due to a number of factors, particularly the supply chain problems, and the prices increased. And panic buying also one of the reasons for increase in the prices of the necessities, particularly medicines and the masks, sanitizers, and pain relief tablets. All these goods, they have witnessed the increase in prices. And the agriculture products also, the prices increased because of the supply bottlenecks. And production was there, but supply was affected due to the lockdown and transport problems, etc., etc. And our reliance on important critical goods like semiconductors, for example. So we don't produce many of the goods, and we depend on imports for various intermediary goods, particularly in automobile sector, etc. And the supply of those goods was affected, and the prices increased manifold. And hoarding also one of the important reasons for increase in the prices of essentials. And shortage of containers, it was another important problem the exporters and importers faced. And the shipping charges increased by 205%. And any increase in shipping charges, that will result in increase in transport cost. Any increase in transport cost will be passed on to consumers. That means prices of the goods will also increase. So that will further fuel the inflation in the country. So we have witnessed a double-digit growth in wholesale price index because of the increase in raw material cost, particularly the imported items like fuel. So for example, oil prices, now you see how they are increasing because of the supply chain bottlenecks. And that means inflation in our country is because of the imports, and which is also known as imported inflation. And because of the increase in prices of imported goods, our inflation, particularly in wholesale prices, is going up. And it has gone up during the pandemic. And you can see the chart. So this is I'm sorry. This is as far as the consumer price index, and more than 6%. So that means more than the tolerable limit of the RBI inflation. So RBI is given a target rate of inflation of 4% and plus or minus 2%. That means the inflation should be within the range of 2 to 6%, and anything above 6% is, that means we are going beyond the tolerable limit. Any inflation less than 2% is also below the more than the tolerable limit. That means the role of the RBI is to manage inflation between 2 and 6, and because of the pandemic, it has gone up beyond the tolerable limit of the RBI. But still, RBI has not increased the policy rates to contain the inflation, because economic growth was also badly affected. So that was the reason why, in spite of the inflation going beyond the tolerable limits of the RBI, still the policy rates, that means repo rate, reverse repo rate, they were not touched, and they were kept. In fact, the RBI reduced the repo and reverse repo rates in spite of the inflation. So what are the consequences of inflation? This is maybe of interest to the students who are attending the webinar. So inflation will have negative impact on households, particularly poor households. They will not have money to spend because the real income will come down because of the inflation, and it will push millions of families to cut back their expenditure. Particularly, if any cutback on food expenditure will result in the malnutrition situation, or it may affect the food security of people, and particularly the nutrition levels of children will come down. And we have seen during the lockdown, schools were closed and no midday meal was supplied to the children, and many children, they pushed into a status of malnutrition. And in fact, there is an act called National Food Security Act, which was passed in 2013. As per that act, if midday meal is not provided to the children, they must be given some allowance so that they can buy the food outside and take it. But no such allowance was given in many states, including our state. So the many children, because of the closure of schools, they were pushed into malnutrition situation. And inflation also reduced the savings of people, and household savings drastically fallen. And any reduction in savings will have impact on future consumption. So that will also have an impact on future investments, and negatively affect the economic recovery. And when the investment and the saving situation is not good and inflation is very high, foreign global investors will not come to our country and invest in our in our market. So this is one of the important consequences of the inflation. And the third factor on which the pandemic had the impact was unemployment. So the unemployment increased by about 12% by the end of May 2021. And that means loss of jobs by about 1 crore people. 1 crore people, they lost their jobs, and incomes of 97% of households declined. One survey showed that incomes of 97% of the households declined because of the pandemic, and it pushed 23 crore people below the poverty line. So, and 15% poverty increase in rural areas and 20% poverty increase in urban India we have witnessed. And had there been no pandemic, the rural and urban poverty would have declined by 5% and 1.5% respectively between 2019 and 20, but 50 million people would have been lifted out of above poverty line. But instead, many people, they were pushed into poverty, and the number of people below the poverty line increased. And the fourth sector, which was, of course, not very adversely, which did not witness much impact, was agriculture sector. But still, in agriculture also some impact was there. And of course, magnitude-wise, the impact was less as compared to many other sectors. Agriculture production had not been the impact was not much, because by the time the lockdown was announced, the harvesting was over, and but the allied sectors were badly affected. For example, if you see poultry sector, there was a decline of 19.5%, and fisheries sector decline of 13.6%. Sheep, goat, and pig, which is called SGP sector, minus 8.5%. And this is the people, they feared eating non-vegetarian food, because they thought that non-vegetarian food will spread pandemic and COVID among the people. That is the reason why the consumption of non-vegetarian food drastically declined, and that affected all the allied sectors, particularly fisheries, then sheep, goat, pig sector, and poultry sector. And production in dairy declined by 6.6%, and horticulture production declined by 5.7% due to disruption in supply chain. So vegetables, they were produced, but they did not have adequate transport facility for marketing. And because of that, the horticulture sector was also badly affected by the pandemic. And agriculture prices declined. The highest decline in prices was in poultry sector by 17.8%, and horticulture sector 7.6% reduction in prices. Dairy 5.6% reduction in prices. Fisheries 4.8% reduction in prices, and SGP 2.9% reduction in prices due to supply chain problems. So all the allied sectors of agriculture, they were badly affected due to the pandemic. And as far as input cost is concerned, availability and prices both had a negative impact. For example, availability of agriculture inputs, particularly if you see seeds, it declined by 9.2%. Fertilizers availability declined by 11.2%. Pesticides availability declined by 9.8%. Fodder availability declined by 10.8%. And the prices of agriculture products, particularly seeds, increased by 8.8%. Fertilizer prices increased by 10.10%. Pesticide prices increased by 9%. Fodder prices increased by 11.6%. So agriculture was also affected, not in terms of growth in agriculture, but mostly in terms of the impact on allied sectors and impact on input prices and the prices of agriculture commodities. Agriculture sector was badly affected. And microfinance, all of you know the importance of microfinance. So if it is in between the banking, formal and informal sector, for example, between banks and money lenders, microfinance plays a very critical role in the development of the country. If microfinance is not taken care of, the people have to go to money lenders for their needs. And money lenders, we know how much interest they charge, and sometimes the interest rates go up to even 10% per month. So that is the rate at which they take interest from the people. And microfinance institutions, they play a key role in helping the people. So particularly, though some of the people, they cannot approach the banks because they don't have anything to pledge, and banks will not give non-collateral loans. So microfinancial institutions give collateral loans. So microfinancial institutions are very important for the country, particularly poor people. Micro and small institutions, small enterprises, they help in providing the required finance. So the sector caters to about 3.22 crore clients with a loan portfolio of about 74,000 crores. And the earning capacity of microfinancial institution clients, it came down, and it threatened the MFI's existence. But unless the clients repay the loan, microfinance institutions cannot give loans to the new clients. And this is how the microfinance was badly affected by the pandemic. And the next sector which was affected by the pandemic was MSME sector. So MSMEs means micro, small and medium enterprises, and it contributes about 30 to 35% of the GDP. In that, micro sector, micro enterprises, they contribute 99%. They constitute 99% of the total MSMEs, and small enterprises, they constitute about 0.5%, and medium enterprise only 0.01%. So among MSMEs, 49% they are from rural areas, and 51% are from semi-urban and urban areas. And the states which dominate the MSME sector are UP, West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Bihar, AP, and Gujarat in that order. So they have the highest number of MSMEs in the country, and there are about 75 million MSMEs, and they provide in 75 million MSMEs, 18 million MSEs, they were very badly affected and they were at the verge of closure. And they they produce several types of goods, such as consumer goods, garments, and they provide logistics support. And they witnessed a drastic drop in their business because of because of sometimes because of lockdown, and sometimes because of the problem with consumers. They don't have money to buy the goods. That is the reason why demand was affected. And the next sector which was affected by the pandemic was manufacturing sector. So some of the indicators which show whether the manufacturing sector is functioning well or not, we will discuss. These are also very important, particularly for students. One of the important indicators is Purchase Managers Index. So Purchase Managers Index, it is a high frequency indicator. So every month we will see the survey on purchase managers' intentions, and an index is published. And index, the dividing line of the index is 50. Anything above 50 shows optimism, and anything below 50 shows pessimism. And during the pandemic, the purchase managers index fell down to 27.4. Dividing 27.4 too far from the state, and no purchases and no intention to revive the units. So, and most affected industries in the manufacturing sector were metals, chemical products, motor vehicles, machinery, equipment, and textiles. And automobile sector was one of the worst affected sectors because of the pandemic. And it witnessed a loss of about 2,300 crores per day, and job loss of about 3.45 lakhs. And equipment manufacturers, they cut production by 18 to 20% due to low demand from the main manufacturers. And equipment manufacturers means ancillaries. So ancillaries, they cut down their production by about 18 to 20%. The recovery of the manufacturing sector was badly affected due to supply chain problems. So for example, availability of semiconductors is affected. So we are seeing, even now, still today, the automobile sector is not able to get the adequate number of semiconductors to increase their production. That is the reason why even now there is waiting period for some of the vehicles. If you book the vehicle immediately, they are not giving. Before the pandemic, we used to just go to the automobile shop and buy it, and within one day or sometimes then and there, they used to give the delivery of the vehicle. Now one has to wait for a very long period to get the delivery of the vehicle. So this is because of the supply chain problems, particularly the non-availability of semiconductors. And the next sector, which is affected by the COVID, is services sector. Services sector, all of us know, it contributes about 60% of the GDP of the country. And the purchase managers index of services sector, it fell to 46.4%. Of course, as compared to the fall in purchase managers index of manufacturing sector, the fall in services purchase managers index of the services sector was low, and 46.4, it is not very low as compared to the dividing line of 50. And the worst affected sectors in services sector were all the sectors which are contact intensive. For example, food delivery. So we fear, for example, if somebody comes and wants to give us food, so people were not willing to order food online because it involves contact. So contact intensive sectors were badly affected, particularly restaurants, and then hotels, service apartments, pubs, bars, nightclubs, etc. All these sectors were affected. And one thing which we need to remember in this is these sectors which we have discussed. They provide lot of employment. Many people, particularly migrant workers, they work in these pubs, bars, nightclubs, hotels, restaurants, etc. And their employment was very badly affected. And tourism, it contributes about 7% of India's GDP. It comprises of hotels, homestay, holiday homes, motels, and etc. And all these activities were affected. And aviation and travel. So still the aviation sector has is in the recovery path. Still, the complete recovery has not taken place, and we are seeing the different the COVID in phases, and in every phase, the worst affected sector is aviation sector. And people still, they have not gained confidence to travel, to go to tourist places, and that is one of the important reasons why the tourism sector and aviation sector are still in the recovery path. Real estate and construction disruption also taken place because of the migrant labor, because real estate and construction sector, it is heavily dependent on the migrant labor, and all the migrant labor left the urban areas and they reached their home places, and many of them, it took very long time for them to come back to their work. And because of that, the real estate and construction sector was also affected. And household finance savings, if you see, savings, they were about 21% of GDP in the first quarter of 2020, and in the second quarter, they fell down to 10.4% of GDP, from 8 lakhs 15,000 crores to they fell down to about 4 lakhs 92 crores or so. And in quarter 3 of 2020, if you see, the household savings were only 8.2% of the GDP. That means about 4.4 crores. So drastic decline in the household savings of the people. Similarly, bank deposits also fell significantly, and they were 21% of GDP in the first quarter of 2020 at about 8.15 lakh crores, and they fell down to 3.67 crores, that is about 7.7% of GDP, and they further fell down to 3% of GDP, that is about 1.73 crores. So drastic decline in the household bank deposits. That showed that how much the household sector was affected by the pandemic. And the other effects of impacts on household sector included disruptions into the food supply chain. So we have already discussed about how the food supply chain was affected, and large levels of unemployment, particularly informal workers. So in India, still many people, they work in an informal sector, and formalization, it is not taking place at the expected level. And when the employment is not formal, so the loss of employment is very high, and they will not have any social security. And increase in the vulnerability of migrant workers, and gender-based violence at home increased, and household expenditure declined due to reduced incomes, and health expenditure as a percentage of total expenditure declined. So this should not be taken as a positive sign, because people stopped visiting doctors, and they reduced the out-of-pocket health expenditure. That means they were postponing the doctor's visits. For example, a diabetic patient, if that person does not visit the doctor frequently, and if the sugar levels go up, and if they go beyond the controllable levels, then that will have negative impact on other parts of the body, such as kidneys, etc., etc. So people postponed the health expenditure because they did not have money to spend, and they postponed the visits to doctors. Next slide. And the other impact is food expenditure. Per capita food expenditure reduced so by about 7% on an average in rural areas, and 8.5% in urban areas. So any reduction in food expenditure, that will have negative impact on the nutritional security of the people. So but as a percentage of total expenditure, food expenditure increased. These two are different. Food expenditure, per capita food expenditure declined, but total food expenditure as a percentage of total expenditure increased. That means if I spend earlier, if I was spending 100 rupees on food, now I am spending only 90 rupees. But this 90 rupees constitutes about 60 or 70% of my total expenditure. That means in the people do not have money to spend on other things. Whatever the money that they have, they were spending only on food. So this will have a negative impact on the demand for other things, and whatever the money the people had, they were spending only on food. And rural people having diabetes and hypertension face difficulty in accessing medicines, and reduced and fruit and vegetable consumption declined because people did not have money to spend on that. And education, all of us know how education was badly affected, closure of schools. And one thing which we have to understand is not to educate, the incidental to closure of schools is lack of nutritional support to the young children, and support for basic things such as food. And when the schools are closed and Anganwadis are not functioning to the desired extent, then the young children and pregnant women, then the school children of primary and upper primary classes, they will be affected. And it created a digital divide. So pandemic created digital divide, and the people who have access to the electronic devices, particularly the laptops, etc., they were not affected much as compared to the kids who do not have any access to any digital equipment. So the poor people, education of the poor people, particularly studying in budget schools, very, very small schools, local schools, they were badly affected because all those schools were closed. Now, one study shows that many budget schools are closed, and the students are shifting from budget schools to government schools. So that is the reason why now there is demand for increasing the facilities. In the economic survey the other day, it also mentioned the same point, because many small schools in private sector, they are closed, and the students, they are looking to government schools for support. And it has created need for improving the facilities at the government schools to attract those children and to accommodate those children in the government schools. And this, so far we have discussed about the negative impact of the COVID or pandemic on various sectors of the Indian economy. Now let us discuss about the positive impact of COVID. So there are so many positives that took place because of the COVID. One is a more digital economy. Now India is becoming much more digital as compared to pre-pandemic period. And from buying groceries to payments to all these things, everything has become now digital. And even vegetable vendors, now they have that scan code, and we can pay online to them. And e-commerce shopping base has increased by 30%. And still, of course, it is less as compared to China and US, but we are on the path of increasing in the increase in the e-commerce shoppers base. And online shoppers, one estimation is that India's online shoppers will jump up to 590 million, and it happened also. And lot of increase in the number of people who are doing online shopping. The average spending on online shopper is doubled to about 22,000 rupees. That is average spending per person. And positive impact, the other positive impacts include the global supply chains are redrawn. For example, we are seeing in the newspapers also how the India has become a substitute to China in terms of attracting investments. And once upon a time, China was the factory of the world and pillar of global supply chains for everything from chips to APIs. That means pharma ingredients, everything we were dependent on China. Every country in the world, it was dependent on China. Now the perceptions about China changed, and the pandemic was also one of the reasons. And people still believe that the originator of the pandemic is China, and people have developed some sort of negative opinion about the China, and so much of manufacturing activity, it is getting shifted from China to other countries, and India is one of the major beneficiaries of such a change, and India is going to become a supply chain hub of the world in future. And COVID has resulted in I'm sorry. Several reforms in India, particularly the in mining sector, coal sector liberalized earlier. The private sector was not allowed to mine the coal. Now private sector is allowed to mine the coal because coal shortage we witnessed, and any crisis will give an opportunity to reform. And for example, our former Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao used the 1991 crisis to the maximum extent, and he initiated several reforms in the economy. And now Narendra Modi, our present Prime Minister, also used the COVID situation to the advantage of the country by initiating several reforms in several sectors. One of the reforms is liberalization of coal sector and simplification of labor laws and introduction of agri-market reforms. Of course, there is a temporary pause in the agriculture market reforms, but I think it will not be stopped. It will gather pace at a later stage. And privatization, it has gathered a lot of pace, and the government has taken up asset monetization scheme. So that means whatever the assets which are not in use at present by several public sector enterprises, now they will be monetized. For example, railway land, lot of land is there with the railways, and which is not put to any use. Now they want to make use of that land by leasing to private people or by constructing some commercial ventures on the land and getting some income on that. So asset monetization is nothing but realizing some income on the assets which are not in use. So that's what the government wants to do. And capital markets, the lot of liquidity rush is there in the capital markets because of the stimulus packages announced by several countries, particularly US. So trillions of dollars they were spent on stimulating the economy, and all that much of that money has come to emerging markets such as India. And our stock markets, you have seen, and they went up to 62,000 mark. Our Sensex crossed 62,000 mark because of the flow of money from developed economies to India. And the nature of jobs transformed. Work from home has become a new normal, and the increase in gig workers. Now, gig workers are independent contractors, online platform workers, contract firm workers, on-call workers, and temporary workers. That means they are not permanent workers. As and when there is work, they will come and work. And many of the people, they want to balance their work and passion. Such people, they are opting for gig work. And when they need money, they work. And after that, they pursue their own passion. For example, they are interested in music. They pursue the music as a profession. And whenever they require money, they do some part-time jobs. So part-time jobs, the number increased because of the COVID. And Atmanirbhar Bharat. This is one of the important reforms that the government has introduced to face not only to face the COVID situation, but also taking advantage of the COVID, how to grow further and how to make India take the India to the next stage. Atmanirbhar Bharat was introduced, and Atmanirbhar Bharat focuses on economy, infrastructure, technology-driven systems, vibrant demography, and demand. These are the 5 pillars of the Atmanirbhar Bharat. economy. So the vision is to make the Indian economy a 5 trillion economy by 2025. So of course, it may be a very big task, but still we are in the path of becoming a 5 trillion economy. If not by 2025, maybe in another another couple of years, that may be 2028 or 2030, we may become definitely a 5 trillion economy. And as far as infrastructure is concerned, want to become country as far as infrastructure of the country is concerned. So a lot of public investment. Today's budget, you must have seen 7 lakh crores the government wants to spend on infrastructure, and they are expecting a lot more from the private sector to be invested. And so many people, they are saying that the today's budget presented by the finance minister is infrastructure budget. So growth budget. That's what they are saying. And as far as the technology-driven systems means, everything should be technology-driven. So the intervention of people should be less and technology should be more, and that will take our country to the next level, and our economy will become a technology-driven economy. And our demography. So we want to make use of our demographic advantage. That is what is known as demographic dividend. And we have more percentage of people in the in working age group as compared to any other country in the world. But so far we are not able to take advantage of the demography of the country. Now, with the introduction of the new education policy, which is called National Education Policy, the country may take advantage of the demographic dividend and grow further. And the demand supply chain has to be utilized to an optimum level, and so the demand must be pushed up by more spending and by making the supply chain much more effective. These are the 5 pillars of the Atmanirbhar package that the Prime Minister announced. So to face the COVID pandemic, the Prime Minister announced a special economic and comprehensive package of 20 lakh crores, which was equivalent to 10% of India's GDP. So to cater to cottage industries, MSMEs, laborers, poor middle class industries, etc., etc. We will very quickly go through the packages that were announced. It may be of interest to particularly the students. And insurance cover up to 50 lakh rupees per health worker. 80 crore poor people got 5 kg wheat oblique rice per person. 1 kg dal per month per household. 20 crore women Jandan account holders got 500 rupees per month for 3 months. 8 crore poor families got gas cylinders free of cost for 3 months. And Narega wage increased to 202 rupees from 182 rupees, benefiting about 13.62 crore families. Ex gratia of 1,000 to 3 crore poor senior citizens, widows, and physically challenged. And 2,000 rupees paid to farmers under PM Kisan to benefit about 8.7 crore farmers. And Building and Construction Workers Welfare Fund was used to provide relief to workers. And 24% of monthly wages were created into PF accounts for 3 months for people who are receiving less than 15,000 per month and working in a business which was having less than 100 workers. And 5 crore workers registered under Employee Provident Fund. They got non-refundable advance of 75% of the amount to their credit of their accounts. And collateral free lending increased from 10 lakhs to 20 lakhs for women SHGs, and about 6.85 crore households got benefited. And RBI, so this is also, RBI also took several measures to help the economy. And ways and means advance limits to states to spend more increased by 60%. And pending income tax refunds were cleared by the government. And 15,000 crores for emergency health response package it was spent. So that is the reason why from a deficit state to we have reached a surplus stage as far as oxygen availability is concerned. And reduction of cash reserve ratio, which infused about 1,37,000 crores into the market by improving the liquidity situation in the market. Liquidity is very, very important. We must get the money at a lower rate of interest, and also availability of money should also be there, and banks should have adequate money to lend. So liquidity is very important, and RBI reduced the cash reserve ratio to infuse liquidity into the system, and targeted long-term repo operations. Long-term repo operations means giving loans, money to the banks at repo rate. So 1,50,000 crore for money is given to the banks by RBI, and this money was used by banks to buy corporate bonds and commercial paper, and of NBFCs, MFIs, etc. And bank limit for borrowing overnight and marginal standing facility is there with RBI, where from the banks can borrow for their immediate requirement of money. And RBI gave about 1,37,000 crores additional money under this facility to the banks. All these measures were to improve the liquidity in the market. And there are some refinancing institutions like NABARD, SIDBI, NHB, etc. And what they do is, when the banks give loans for agriculture or small industry or housing loans, whatever the loans banks give, that will be refinanced by these the NHB in the case of housing loans, and the SIDBI in the case of small scale loans, and NABARD in the case of agriculture loans. So 50,000 crores refinancing is given by these institutions to banks at repo rate. So very, very less interest rate. So opening of a special liquidity facility to the banks, and 50,000 crores for mutual funds to come out of the liquidity pressure. Our moratorium is given for 3 months for payment of installments and interest on working capital by the MSMEs. And 3 lakh crore collateral-free automatic loans for MSMEs was given. Collateral-free loans, it is a very, very big thing for MSMEs. So without any guarantee that they have got the loans from banks, and these loans were guaranteed by government. So 100% credit guarantee by government to the banks of such loans. That means almost 3 lakh crores government loans were guaranteed by the government. If these people, they do not pay the loan, government has to repay it to the banks. That means it is not a NPA to the banks, and the non-payment risk will be borne by the government. And because of this, 45 lakh units were expected to reopen and safeguard the jobs of people who are working in that. So 20,000 crores subordinate debt to MSMEs was given. Subordinate debt means unsecured, with no security. So such loans were given to MSMEs by the banks. And MSME definition was changed. This is also an important thing which we need to take into consideration. And micro enterprises were defined as enterprises which are having 25 lakhs of investment, up to 25 lakhs of investment and 1 crore turnover. Small industries up to 5 crores investment and 10 crores turnover. Medium enterprises 10 crores investment and 100 crores, 10 crores to 20 crores and 100 crores turnover. And that means the limits of all these micro enterprises, small enterprises, and medium enterprises was enhanced. So this step was taken because many enterprises, they don't want to grow beyond a particular size, because once they go out of the definition of the government, they will not get the benefits. So for example, a small enterprise, if it crosses the limit fixed by the government for small enterprise, they will lose the status enterprise and they will not get the governmental benefits. For the fear of that, many enterprises were not growing beyond a particular size, and to tide over that situation, the government enhanced the investment limits, and they introduced a new thing called turnover into the definition, because investment most of the times it cannot be identified and cannot be recorded. But as far as turnover is concerned, many of these enterprises, they are registered in GST platform. So when they need to disclose their turnover. So that is the reason why turnover is much more easy to measure as compared to the investment. So government introduced turnover also as one of the aspects to identify the MSMEs. And government has given so many facilities to the MSMEs because MSMEs contribute a lot to the GDP of the country. No global tenders by government up to 200 crores procurement, no global tenders. That means MSMEs can participate, and EPF contributions by government, and then 30,000 crores special liquidity scheme for investment in debt papers of NBFCs, HFCs, MFIs, etc. And 45,000 crores partial credit guarantee scheme for NBFCs, because NBFCs means non-banking financial companies. They suffered a lot because of COVID, and any loan taken by the NBFC, if it does not repay, 20% of the loss will be borne by the government. That is partial credit guarantee scheme the government introduced for NBFCs to get money so that the liquidity with the NBFCs will improve. That will help the NBFCs to lend to the needy. So this is another important, that means so far we have discussed about the steps taken by the government to help the various sectors of the economy, particularly MSMEs, then small people, then small households, poor people. Several steps government took to help these people to tide over the crisis. And the most important aspect to help the growth of the economy, which was badly affected by COVID, was introduction of several schemes. One of the important schemes the government introduced was PLI, Production Linked Incentive. 14 sectors are getting government support. So that means if somebody establishes a unit or expands capacity in the identified sectors, they will be given financial support by the government, and 1,80,000 crores was set aside for that purpose. And this is expected to result in 30 to 40 lakh crore investment by private sector in these 14 sectors. So this will make India a manufacturing hub for many commodities, including semiconductors. So the government is supporting electronics, the government is supporting many textiles, so many sectors government is supporting under PLI. And National Infrastructure Pipeline, this is the second important measure government has taken, and 1.97 lakh crores they have allocated for that purpose. And it is this particular, under this scheme, energy, roads, railways, and urban projects are supported. And Gati Shakti, this is also an important scheme introduced by the government, and it helps in supply chain strengthening, multimodal connectivity. So connectivity for movement of people, goods, and services from one mode of transport to the other, like that means the last mile connectivity. So for example, if some goods are imported from ship to the train to the place of the factory, everything is connected. So roads, then waterways, then dry land ports, and small places are also connected by the air service, like under Udan scheme. So transport facility and supply chain strengthening is the objective of the Gati Shakti project. And under that, Bharat Mala, Sagar Mala, then inland waterways, dry land ports, and Udan, that means air connectivity, all these things are improved. So this is what the government has done to revive the economy, and we will see the benefits of these schemes in the coming days, and we may come over the impact, the bad days of COVID, and India will grow at a faster pace, and all of us will lead a healthy life. That is my wish, and let us all wish for that. So now I think I wanted to take less time, but I have taken some 10 minutes more. So if the organizers permit, any participant, if they have anything to raise, for example, a question or suggestion.
We thought we will keep the question session at the end of the webinar, sir.
Okay.
So I thank Professor S.V. Satyanarayana Garu for such a elaborate message on the topic, and I'm sure he has not left any sector uncovered. With a very nice explanation, and the facts and figures were very beautifully presented by Professor Sir. Thank you very much, Professor Satyanarayana Garu, for taking your time out. I now request Dr. N.K. Kishore to kindly address the audience. Dr. N.K. Kishore, please.
Yeah. Good afternoon, good evening to all of you. I'll take my presentation with your kind permission. Sir, someone can guide me if my presentation is visible?
Yes, sir, it is. It is visible.
Okay. So, first of all, thanks to Professor Satyanarayana sir for the elaborate discussion and a complaint that he has not left anything for me to speak. Still, what I could cover, at least an overview, I will try to do that part. Small disclaimer, and mode of discussion is only on the tables. We'll only have a look at the numbers to understand the trend and the impact. So sir has given us elaborate explanation about GDP. Nothing more from me to add, but I would like to add one point, rather elaborate what sir has already explained. GDP of an economy will guide the other economies, not only our economy but other economies, to understand to which economy can a capital flight happen. So in simple words, if I may say, Indian GDP of 9%, 9.2% this year, what is projected, will guide the other economies to look at India as a destination where they can do business to earn at least 9.2% as a normative return on their business. Their economy may be allowing them to make 2.5%, 3% or whatever. The alpha of 5% is what they look at when they want to shift their capital, let the capital fly from their economy to India. Which also explains us, if a business in India is making less than 9.2% in the next year, they are subsidizing the other businesses or the economy, or they are inefficient. Someone earning more than 8.2%, yes, they are smart. You understood it right. So, the contribution to GDP from the three major sectors, agriculture, industry and services. Sir has given the split. Of course, let me elaborate. Agriculture is now contributing, last 2 years it contributed about 18%, but normatively it has been at 16.5, 16.4% contribution. Industry has been between 26.5 to 29.5%. Services sector as a normative number is at 55% contribution to the GDP. 3.2 is a trillion size of our GDP presently. By 2025, our 5 trillion target may not be possible looking at the present growth rate, because we need to grow at least 10% for the next 6-7 years, failing which we may not be able to reach 5 trillion. Maybe we would have achieved, but for this COVID gap. That apart, GDP by component on the consumption, if you look at household consumption is contributing close to 60% to the GDP. Government consumption is about 11.5, and fixed capital formation and investment is about 28.5. This fixed capital is for both government and the private entrepreneurs. And what is stuck in inventories as a float is about 3.9%, and we are achieving about 19.1% of the contribution to GDP from exports, and which will be reduced by the exports what eat into that, and net 100 will be the GDP on the as a unity. 9.2 is what government has projected in today's budget that current year we will be able to achieve. Traditionally, India has been seen as an 8% GDP growth rate economy with an alpha of 2 to 5%, depending upon the other countries what we are talking about. And we know the difference between GDP and GVA. GVA is in a way a better measure because it knocks off the taxes and the subsidies, etc., which explains what is the actual value addition happening in the economy. But it makes not much of difference for us to understand as an economic student or a scholar, because GDP and GVA are moving in the same direction in India, at least, which is not the case in all the economies. At least in India, they have been moving the same because of broadly stable tax rates. There is no knee-jerk tax rate changes. Therefore, they have been moving in the same direction. The sectoral contribution. If you look at the sectoral contribution, agriculture and allied sectors, as we just now spoke, are expected to contribute about 18.8% this year, the coming year, whereas they were revised to have been contributed at 18.4 between 19 to 20, the revised estimates, and the provisional estimates for 2021 stated at 20% because agriculture suffered less than the other sectors. Industry at the same traditional 25 to 26%, it remained broadly same, but because of the pent up demand, what is expected, industry is expected to post about 1.5 to 2% higher contribution. Services sector is expected to see a bit of diminution by about 1.5 to 2%, which is visible in this. Then the specific change what we can see is public administration, defense and other services within the services sector is expected to contribute slightly more because of the contributions which are being recognized as made from these sectors. In the nominal GDP, we all speak about nominal GDP, as you understand, because in real GDP, in terms of real GDP, India is in third position, whereas in nominal GDP, we are in sixth position, and our target or the projection is to reach a third position by 2030 in terms of nominal GDP only. Real GDP, we are expected to reach number 2 after China, surpassing USA. This is by 2030. So GDP is always understood from the consumption point of view, although it is the gross domestic product addition, we understand it better from the consumption point of view only. So you can see the government consumption contributes about 12.5 and private consumption contributes 58.6, and the gross fixed capital formation, which we understood as 28.8 in our GDP slide for the last year, is about 27.1 in the recorded year, then expected to be 29.6 for the coming year. Exports are expected to decline in terms of percent, but in terms of absolute numbers they may increase. Imports are expected to increase more than exports, therefore the next net export is negative. And we spend some time on these high frequency indicators. While we have seen sectoral analysis explained by Professor Sir, it's worthwhile to see how the economy status, direction, trend or the impact of anything on economy can be understood. There are 80 HFIs which are listed in India by the government of India. Let us quickly look at these things, each of them with a sentence, and we understand everything about economy. These are the indicators which explain about the economy. 10-year AAA corporate bond yield. 10-year AAA corporate bond yield explains almost a quasi GSEC yield. It explains what is the return you can safely earn, almost like your RF, risk-free rate, if you invest in blue chip companies. That is always compared with 10-year GSEC yield. Presently 10-year GSEC yield is at 6.743 or 742, whatever. Third notch slightly dynamic. So 6.75, 6.74 is present GSEC yield. You can understand this more elaborately when you understand what is the home loan rates now. 6.5 to 6.8 are the home loan rates, which means the present offtake is being low and therefore the loan rates are at the lowest level now, almost historically lowest levels now, and the spread between GSEC yield and a home loan is almost negligible or zero. 8 core industries index. So this is one of the thumb rule which government always will look at when it understands what should be the subsidies or what should be the tax pattern they should look at. So they include your electricity, coal, cement, steel, these eight sectors. That index is very privy to the government to speak about their policy stance, to understand where the capex should go into, to understand what sanctions on import should be levied, what sanctions on export should be lifted, etc. Aadhaar enabled payment system transactions. So this has been one of the recent edition during the past 5-6 years, maybe 10 years. This is explaining the government and us about what are the formal transactions happening, be them in cash, be them in bank, be them in any of the API modes, but what are the formal transactions happening of the cash float in the economy. ATM withdrawals. This is explaining how much of the cash is being withdrawn and what is the ratio between your M0 and M3. M0 being reserve money and M3 being broad money. The ratio, as we know, it is about it has declined during the past 3 years, 2 years, and now it is about 5.2 or odd. It used to be about 5.7 to 8, 5.7 to 5.8. 6 and above is always considered to be a better ratio, monetary ratio. It's also called as money multiplier ratio. But now it has been slow during the past 3 years. So which explains that the conversion of the reserve money to broad money is not happening in a healthy manner. So it explains, or we can refer to what sir has explained already, that credit offtake is not happening, maybe because of lack of liquidity, maybe because of lack of quality paper in the market, be it NCDs, be it bond papers or whatever, or be them quality borrowers with better investment grades upward of BBB plus. Therefore the banks are not able to let credit offtake happen. Average daily electronic toll collection. So this explains about the movement that is happening on road. The more the movement, the more the goods are understood to have been moving and trade is understood to have been happening and the economy is understood to be prospering. Average retail price. So these are broadly the food items, but are considered as the items which fix the retail price line of the economy. It may not include all of the food items, but the key items which are understood to be fixing the price line of the retail price line in the economy. Baltic Dry Index is an equivalent to the toll collection or the road part, because Baltic International Maritime Council BIMCO publishes this Baltic Dry Index with a focus on Shanghai, because Shanghai is the base from where all the major containers move to across the world. As Sir has explained, it's a factory of the world, the back-end factory of the world, and most of the goods originate from there on Baltic movement, dry movement, not charter, dry movement. It explains what is the shipping trade happening, the sea trade happening. Then bank credit. Bank credit is very, very dynamic. It may change in a week also when there is a small change in one of the economic sub features of the banking sector. One of the NPA being liquidated, one of the NPA being sold to ARC, one of the big loan being sanctioned, one of the big investment being received by, let's say, something like RIL or Adani. Any of these factors can change the bank credit offtake within a week also. And the call money rates being high, low, whatever your weighted average call money rates, anything can make a change to the bank rate. And bank credit explains the government what is the interest rate which is prevailing in the market, what is the interest rate RBI is charging, and what's the credit offtake which is happening. Capacity utilization, of course, it's a self-explanatory. It explains what are the capacities being utilized in the economy versus their installed capacities. And capital expenditure. Capex explains what is the capacity addition happening in the economy, and therefore what are the employment opportunities getting added to the economy. Cement production, of course, cement production is related to the housing sector, real estate, construction, etc. But it explains because it is one of the sub-sectors related to the infra, real estate and construction. It explains what is the cement consumption production in the economy, which also has about 41 to 42 subsectors linked to cement, including coal, coke, all that stuff. And commercial papers. We heard the sufficient part about commercial papers in Professor Sir's explanation. Yes, commercial papers float in the market explains what is the urgency for the business to mobilize short-term credit in the expectation that they have a capex coming in the pipeline, and therefore to bridge the gap of their long-term funds mobilization, they are attempting to mobilize immediate funds through commercial paper. Of course, there could be few instances where commercial papers are also floated to take advantage of the lower interest rate regime, and therefore they would like to replace it on an evergreening basis. But that apart, broadly, the instrument's logic is that then corporate sector profits. It needs to explain what are the profits contributed by the corporate sector to the economy. Now, roughly to understand the price earnings ratio of Sensex or Nifty is about 24 or 25. I'm just rounding up the numbers to understand it easily, which means the return from the listed companies as a whole set is 4 because 100 by 25. The inverse of that explains what is the return. So the corporate sector is earning a return, average return of 4% on the capital what is afloat in the market on all the listed companies put together. Then consumer price index. So this refers to the inflation which we have seen elaborately in Sir's explanation. We'll look at a couple of slides to understand more, or here itself we can understand. Consumer price index explains the inflationary trend of in the economy. Consumer price index is measured on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis, on a fortnightly basis also, widely published on a quarterly basis for comparison. It includes core and food and fuel. Core CPI excludes CPI minus food and fuel. Fuel and food being very dynamic on a day-to-day basis. Today morning you go to the market and you find your onions and top tomato, onions and potato, the most important food items in the country, widely tracked by the government for the CPI food inflation. Top tomato, onion and potato. Could be tomato could be 40 in the market today morning, and evening it could be 28. We never know how dynamic they are within the day as well. Therefore, food and fuel are fuel, we know it depends on the Brent and WTI, and also of course the Qatar and Dubai indices. Because those indices fluctuate on a real-time basis, minute to minute, second to second, food and fuel are usually excluded, and then we see what is the actual inflation. The inflation is CPI index score. That is a matter of concern for the government, concern for you and me. And why is not food and fuel concerned? Aren't they concerned? Aren't they of concern? They are. But on an average, if you see, they also have the same pattern of CPI core. Therefore, whether you measure them or whether you don't measure them, include or don't include, may not make much of difference. Then crude oil Indian basket. So what's a basket which is composed of? Basket broadly remaining same, including shale gas, including Brent. Brent, as you understand, is the world's measure of the crude oil. WTI, West Texas Intermediate, is of US, anything into US, out of US. Dubai is from the Gulf Oil Council countries and elsewhere. So it's a Brent what India tracks broadly, and sub is Dubai. WTI is not relevant for us except when we import something to Vietnam and with the sanctions of US, etc. So crude price, as we understand, which pinches a lot whenever we fill our fuel in the bike, in the car, is also an important parameter to understand where this could lead for inflation, interest rates, the capital flights, and also the investments from the foreign countries. Then currency in circulation, which we understood. Currency in circulation we understand from reserve money, MO and M1, M2, M3 broad money. That explains us what is the currency being circulated in the economy. When more the currency is circulated in the economy, of course, currency in circulation as a measure may have lost its sheen, as we can understand, from the explanation sir has given, that because of this digital trend, the currencies are now being used through the digital apps. Therefore, currency in circulation may not be a true measure at the moment, but it still holds value, because about 18 lakh crores is the currency in circulation versus the peak of about 20 to 23 lakh crores, which means while it may have come down, it is still not come down to an insignificant level. Demat accounts, which explain us from 2.5–3%, what is the number of the shareholders who are on board in India participating in the capital markets to invest into the corporate sector or the mutual fund sector, of course. Then domestic auto sales. So this explains mostly in the rural area. As we have understood, rural area has not been affected much. When you see auto sales in the rural area, it explains you indirectly, implicitly, that the crop pattern has been good, the rains are good, crops are good, rates are good, and therefore farmers are relatively better off. When the auto sales are good in the urban area, it explains you that the employment is slightly better, or the increments are better for you and me, and or new models are launched and have met with success, etc. So the number remaining same, metric remaining same, the logic inference could vary from location to location, scenario to scenario, and from person to person. Domestic passenger vehicle sales. So this is a relative term of domestic auto sales, but it explains how many are able. While auto sales explains the broad parameter of everything, passenger vehicle sales explains how many are able to upgrade from a public transportation commuter to a personal vehicle commuter or an opting person. Domestic tractor sales explain about the rural area. It is a self-explanatory. Domestic air passenger traffic, as it's a self-explanatory. You will fly more only when you have money, and when you have trade, when you have employment, when you have business, etc. Otherwise you wouldn't. Of course, during COVID period, you could not. That's a different scenario. And Provident Fund net subscribers outstanding. So how many are getting added to the EPFO base? How many are withdrawing? Also explains what is the formal base of employment. Sir has explained about the gig employees. Gig employees can't opt. They can't so easily opt for EPFO because they work for 4–5 organizations. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work. Sometimes they get work, sometimes they don't get. That is the reality. And therefore they may not have access, because you have to be on rolls of one of the organization to get the subscription to this ESI and EPFO, etc., which is now being addressed by some measures. Still not sufficient, as you have seen in the professor's presentation. The e-way bills generated is in a way proxy to the toll collections, but sometimes it's different, because toll collection could depend upon private vehicles as well, whereas e-way bills are about the trade vehicles. Exchange rate explains you about the appreciation or depreciation, the strength or the weakness of your currency vis-a-vis other currency. Sometimes exchange rate also explains us about the strength of the gold, the LOBUT versus our currency. So we need to understand which currency is pricing which currency. Is Indian rupee pricing the LOBUT, or Indian rupee pricing the dollar euro, or is there a cross currency pricing happening? And when you understand the cross currency pricings, you will understand the actual strength of rupee versus pound sterling, rupee versus dollar versus LOBUT, gold, etc. This all could be understood when you look at a simple exchange rate trend. So much, yes, there is so much. It's just that we need to spend a bit of time on the trend line, on the graph, and understand the influence of its trend. ECB. As we understand, ECB explains one of the beautiful factors of the cross-border finance for the corporate world. If an Indian company is able to mobilize ECB external commercial borrowings, it explains that Indian inflation is high but is stable. Read the 2 points what sir has explained, and I am continuing. Inflation is high. It needs to be higher than what it is in US. Otherwise, people will not come to India to invest, because they will not have the alpha which they would require when they take higher risk of investing in India. They get the alpha, the higher return, because inflation is high in India and their currency is stronger than Indian currency. Therefore, they come here. but the inflation is stable. It could be at 4.5 or it could be between the corridor of 2 to 4, 2 to 6, but it is broadly stable. The changes are not sudden, electrically shocking, they are consistent and predictable. Is when ECBs can flow into the economy alongside the trust that the company which is mobilizing the ECBs is trustworthy, is investment grade company, and has got good profits and is expanding, etc., etc. So this all is explained in one simple trend line of the volumes of ECBs. Net volumes. Sometimes there could be repayments of past ECBs with the new ones, provided they are allowed within 3-year, 1-year window of working capital and capex. So all that stuff netted out will still explain the beauty of what is the corporate strength in mobilizing the funds. Fertilizer sales. One of the proxy to understand how Indian rural sector, the India's true backyard, is performing. The more the fertilizer sales, the more the cropping is happening. At least the projections means you expect good cropping pattern, you expect good rain pattern, you expect good price, therefore you purchase more fertilizers, more seeds and more pesticides, and you are on your best turn to reap more and harvest more. Forex reserves, the present $640 billion explain us that our exports being at about $300 billion, imports being at about 450, 460 odd dollars, and your forex reserves at $640 billion explains you that you are now sitting on a clean 13 to 14 months importable payment equivalent reserves. When you have these abundant reserves in your foreign exchange kitty, you don't need to panic about the fluctuations in the other parameters like the Brent or the WTI or your internal inflation or your exchange rate or your FPIs or your higher imports happening for whatever reason, like in COVID you have imported more of APIs in the initial period. Of course subsequently they got suffered because you couldn't, and your exporters from China who are exporting close to 86% of APIs to India did not export more. So all those things you suffered, but this gives you comfort. The negotiating muscle with your trade partners, how well can you fix the price? You don't need to talk to Vietnam in a low tone because you got the reserves and the basin built in Sri Lanka and which you are using for your fuel storage. Therefore this all is happening because of your high forex reserves. So that explains so much. And fuel consumption explains about the prosperous cycle, the virtuous cycle which is on in the economy. If there is high, if the fuel consumption is low, barring COVID, usually we understand that the trade movement is low. The government market borrowings, this is of course one of the part of OMO of the open market operations of RBI and government together. Sometimes it also could explain, like in the present budget, government is serious to invest 7.5 lakh crores only in the infra segment. Why? All of us knew infra is the one segment which can give one slip flip. Within 6 months time you can see a lot of roads being laid. Within 4 months you can see a lot of buildings being launched, projects being launched. The reserve money flow into the economy to release money multiplier into the economy can happen effectively, instantly, when you invest in infrastructure sector. That money getting flown into most of the pockets of the economy will propel the consumerism, will propel the consumption trend of the economy of most of the goods and services, which is expected to benefit all the sectors. That's the logic behind the launch or the measure of investing 7.5 lakh crores into infrastructure segment. Global PMI composite. Sir has explained the purchasing managers index, which is built on a month-on-month basis with the thing. So that we have already learned well in detail. And gross FDI. FDI explains the private investment into each of the select companies which are worthy of receiving investment from the foreign partners. The more the FDI, the more the investable Indian companies are, and the more the alpha is expected by the investors in that sector vis-a-vis the sectors, vis-a-vis the same sector across the world. Gross tax revenue, self-explanatory. Higher the tax revenue, the better the economy is, etc. GST collections, as you've seen, 1,40,000 is reported as the highest collection ever that has happened in the Indian history. And today GST collections are about 55 to 58% contributing to the whole of the tax revenue, the exchequer, versus what used to be about 14-15% during the previous regimes. Housing launches. Housing launches explain is a self-explanatory. The more the launches, the prosperous cities. People will, the developers will, builders, developers will launch when they expect people to purchase. They expect people to purchase only when the economy is doing well. Housing sales. Launches and sales need not be one and the same. Sometimes out of expectation you would launch and sales are the reality. Like in Hyderabad today we are seeing 55,000 odd stock is there, and there are launches which are unheard of. That's because the big brands are able to sell and the mid-size and lower brands are not able to sell. So it's not that self-explanatory words can be self-explanatory. We need to understand the logic behind them as well, which happens only when we read them together. Yes, IIP is one of the most popular index which we always read along with PMI, GDP, GVA, which explains the trend line of the industrial production, what is happening sector wise and also on a headline for the economy. Merchandise exports, self-explanatory. M and Rega sir has explained very clearly what is the work created, had to be created, and the work demanded. It's created, is it demanded or not, is it availed of or not, it explains. They are related. Money supply, we have been speaking about it from reserve money to broad money, narrow money, broad money. Natural gas production, self-explanatory. The more the gas production, you will produce more gas only when you have orders starting from 3rd year until 10th year, 3rd year to 10th year. So this explains you the long-term perspective of the economic direction, what you are expecting of the economy. Net FDI. This net FDI is like the one what we have spoken about, but net FDI higher explains that India is cumulatively receiving more money, which includes the outflow also, means net of outflows also. Net FPI. FPI is the investment from the foreign countries, the foreign investors getting into the stock markets, self-explanatory. Net liquidity injections. So we understood the injections of liquidity, what is happening into the country, like your VRRR, like your TLRTO, what sir has explained. The central government and the central banker are obligated to ensure sufficient liquidity in the system by force or by influence, so that credit offtake happens and the needy industries would receive the funds for their working capital, for their capex, and therefore the virtuous cycle gets support. Net purchase or sale of US dollar. So this is in a way forex reserves, but the basket now still is dominant with USD, but is also having the euro and Japanese yen and the renminbi and pound sterling, and of course to an extent the Deutsche Mark, the franc, etc. Therefore dollar as a singled out item is always studied apart from forex reserves also. Nifty Sensex, as we understood, 25-24, which we rounded up to understand from 23.8 to 25, will explain what's the trend of the economy. NEAR, as we can read, nominal effective exchange rate, which explains about the purchasing power of your rupee. So as we understood, the nominal GDP is about 3.22 odd trillion, the size, trillion USD size. The real effective exchange rate terms, it is about 18 trillion. And nominal GDP terms, we are 6th in rank in the world, and real effective exchange rate terms, we are 3rd in the world in terms of rank. So it explains, which means effectively speaking, because of low cost of living, let me put within the brackets, low standard of living, we are number 3 in the world. And when you have to look at the nominal terms, we are 6th. Non-food credit. So this explains what is happening to what is the credit offtake happening for the business, services and industry. Non-oil exports. non-oil exports explain the actual value adding happening. 85% of our oil is imported, 15% is produced domestically. Non-oil, non-gold imports. So gold is also one of the most important imports into the country. Non-oil, non-gold imports explain what is actual value adding variable into our production with imported items. Number of telecom subscribers. This doesn't hold any more significance. It may hold relevance, but you understand it well. It's a self-explanatory thing. And PMI manufacturing and PMI services. These are parts of PMI index, broad index, which we understood. Port cargo traffic, like Baltic cargo, but this is about port cargo traffic. It also explains what is the TRT, the turnaround time happening. That happens only when demurrage is avoided and people are willing to pay, and the cargo traffic happens only when demand for imports is high into the country, or demand for Indian exports is high into the mid entry port countries. Power consumption explains only when people are happy they consume more power. Only when the industries are performing well they consume more power, etc. The primary issuances, the IPOs, FPOs, what happens, and the private placement of corporate bonds. We understood this briefly. And rail freight traffic, self-explanatory because it's like Baltic index and your toll collection, etc. Rail passenger earnings, similar way. RBI's current situation, future expectation. These are the indices which are constructed to understand what is the trend of the present direction towards the future, so that RBI can understand should it do a reverse target of your TLRTO or VRRR, or let's say the taper tantrum, etc. measures, which may stifle the present money flows into the economy, but will set the trend from mid to long term in a proper way. Sometimes it could be reverse, vice versa also. REER we have discussed when we discussed its cousin. And a real estate price index. Yes, this is a price index which is built by RBI to understand more the prices of the housing, the real estate, etc. It explains, along with NHB's National Housing Board's index, it explains what are the housing prices. Total retail financial transactions, self-explanatory. This explains about the digital payments, what are happening in the country, which sir has already explained in detail. Sales of true three-wheeler, self-explanatory. Sector-wise indices. So each of the sector, if you have to look at, let's say the major industries in India, steel, cement, and the coal are the three sectors which have moved in a same tandem. In spite of the COVID effect, they have performed relatively better in terms of pricing and profits. While the volume movement may not be good in terms of pricing, they have made up for the industries because the supplies, the cross-border supplies diminish and the production has come down, and therefore the pricing pressure was higher in favor of the producers. Coming to the other sectors like textiles suffered a very an interesting development. What was the interesting development? Broadly the sector suffered, but some of the some segments of the sector like technical textiles, which would go on to manufacture your health related cloth, health related items, the sanitized cloths or the masks, etc. They all have fared well. So that it is the trend about the textile sector. Electronics have performed reasonably well, but the imports were stopped for a good long time because of the lack of cross-border trade. And luckily the Indian electronic industry got a bit of fillip because of the cross-border trade getting stifled. The Indian manufacturers could see their goods off well at a relatively better price, comparatively better price. Then we have your pharma. Pharma has done broadly well, but some of the segments within the pharma have not done well. As you can understand, whatever could relate to your influenza, your corona, etc. have fared very well. And the traditional, as you have seen, the traditional medicines relating to your diabetes, your asthma, and your pneumonia, etc., could not be produced because of lack of manpower, supply of raw materials, and supply and availability or the approvals, etc. and those sub-segments within the pharma have not done well. But the sector broadly has done well. So it's not that sector has done well. Some of the segments within the sector only has done well. Construction, real estate are the worst hit. Sir has explained with classic example of the migrant labor, etc., which we all heard. FMCG is one of the sectors which has been major beneficiary, because you have stopped purchasing biscuits on the road, you have stopped eating items on the road, the street vendors could not sell, and you could not look at them for whatever reason of hygiene and apprehensions are real threats of the health, etc. And the packed food items, being the FMCG, have done extremely well. Within the FMCG, yes, your makeup and your the powder segment, cream segments have all suffered a lot. So sector may have performed well, some of the segments have suffered a lot, some have performed broadly well. Then lastly, the traditional sector, oil and gas sector, it remains same, but has suffered during the lockdown period, because you couldn't consume oil, you have not gone outside, you don't need oil, and businesses have not, the industries have not functioned, they don't need oil. Therefore, due to this reason they suffered, but as the lockdowns were lifted, their consumption have all been neutral. So this is broad sectoral analysis. I took opportunity to cover that part here. Sectoral bank credit. Sir, I explained about credit offtake, how liquidity is important. So you, RBI and we understand what is the credit offtake happening to each of the sectors, so that we understand which sector is performing well, which sector ought to perform well and is not, and therefore which sector would require support in terms of physical, in terms of the government sanctions of imports, exports, etc. And for example, you would have seen in the recent past, there are a lot of sanctions imposed, lifted on vegetable oils. The recent example of last 10 days to 2 months, you wouldn't know when there is a sanction, you wouldn't know when there is no sanction. So in fact, one of the most important case studies for all the finance, accounting and management scholars and professors, of course respected professors, has been the case study of Ruchi Soya Oil. One of the finest oil manufacturing company has suffered a lot because of its dependence on import of raw material of oil from Indonesia and Vietnam, and mostly from Indonesia, Myanmar and other countries. Because of the export sanctions in those countries, import sanctions in our country, that company went bust. It had to be sold. What would have been valued at about 45,000 crores had to be sold for about 4,500 crores to Patanjali, and Patanjali purchased it. And after the management change happened, when they have given the confidence to the bankers that they can borrow afresh, they have purchased it at 10% of the value. So there is a haircut of 90% to the bankers, bank loans. And after they purchased it for 4,500, the true value of the company got reflected in the market, and the price of the company, the value of the company returned to its true past levels of 45,000 crores. So understand what these sanctions could make to an economy, to any sector or to any industry in the economy. And Ruchi being one of the dominant player, the major shareholder in the Indian oil sector, the edible oil sector, has been a case study for everyone to understand, which we all know. Then steel consumption. So it's a sister indices of cement, coal, etc. And mandi arrivals explain what is the produce volumes, the harvest in the rural backyard. Unified payments interface transactions like your Bharat Pay, Phone Pay, Paytm, etc., all happening through the the government's UPI now. This explains what is the formal cash transactions happening, the amount transactions happening. Then US Dow Jones Index. This is a proxy for India to understand. Used to be a very close proxy, still a proxy to understand what could be the direction or the trend of Indian stock market tomorrow. So many of our professors sleep at 2 o'clock after having a look at DJIA to understand what would be tomorrow's fate for their investments in Sensex and Nifty. And they have a good sleep or a bad sleep depending upon the trend what they note here, because of the 12 hours gap between both the economies. The vehicle registrations, self-explanatory. The weighted average interest rate on fresh bank lending. The MCLR is an example what we all understand. So whether Sir has explained that 115 basis points reduction was effected by RBI to give to increase the liquidity into the economy. The reduction happened in marginal standing facility, bank rate facility, your repo and reverse repo, and your targeted long-term reverse repo transactions, VRRR transactions, OMO transactions, or bond purchase have made by RBI, or even your additional over and above the 4% what is allowed to the states, the additional borrowing allowed by the government, all those things have a bearing on the additional borrowings or the lendings what happen in the economy. That will have to be studied whether the 115 basis points reduction by RBI is passed on by the banks to the lender, to the borrowers or not. Is it passed on to the fresh loans only, or is it also affected by virtue of reset to the existing borrowers also? This all is the study what we usually make and understand about the. And wholesale price index, WPI, is a sister of CPI, but less relevant for us because we concern more of we have concern of CPI. Yield spreads across different maturities. 10 year, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, and long term 20 years. We'll always measure those four. And we have discussed most of these things, so I run a bit faster and take you to one of them. This is broadly what Sir has explained. What happened during COVID? Supply chain disruptions, raw material shortage, capacity underutilization, labor shortage, weaker demand, special regulatory restrictions, liquidity crunch, and this vicious circle unintentionally prevailed because of pandemic, and that effect lasted on the economy during 1920 and 2021, and now is a year we are expecting the economy to fare better as a historically fare better during the past 15-16 years. So I take you to this part. So this we all understand. So Sir has already explained that current year 9.2 is expected to be the fiscal deficit, while fiscal deficit as per FRBM Act has to be only 4%, with a leeway of another half a percent. It has crossed the limit. It has crossed the limit. Sorry, it has to be 0.5 additionally. It has crossed the limit between in 2019-20 and shot up to 9.2. This year also it is expected to be between 6.8 odd because of additional borrowings required by the government to propel the economy and to infuse liquidity into the economy. Fiscal deficit is not on the budget figure of your 39.50 lakh crores. It's not about the 40 lakh crores budget size. This is on the GDP, which means higher the GDP. If GDP could surpass the expected numbers of 3.2 trillion, what we've read, 9.2 could come down. So that is the equation, the function what could work in favor of the deficit deficit calculation. The bank rate growth, what Sir has already explained, sectoral growth, CPI, WPI, we have already seen. Don't think that we are missing anything. We have covered most of it in Sir's explanation. Some we are adding here. I will take you to the, yes, this is an interesting thing. Why the growth in the bank rate to service sector has been tipsy-turvy? Why isn't it stable like it is for industry and agriculture sector? Why is it so? This is so because services sectors traditionally require, command lower credit than their other sisters, industry and agriculture. Agriculture, by virtue of the regulatory requirement of the government and the central bank. Industry, because it is glamorous, it pays more NIM, it yields more NIM to the banking sector. Therefore, banks prefer to lend to the industries. But services sector, because they lack the tangible, broadly, they lack the tangible collaterals, be them primary securities, be them collateral securities. services sector command lower credit. Also, they should be requiring lower credit because they don't invest into any capex or less into capex or less into capital intensive operations. That apart, for good long period until 2018, they also commanded reasonably high credit. But thereafter, it has been unsystematic trend depending upon their export possibilities. And in the services sector, if you see, the majority, almost 53%, is from the software, ITS, BPO sector. Now there is a new term which is added by the honorable finance minister, other processing services, OPO something, OPO, all of them put together. So they hardly require any capex, and they require capex once in 4 years. Whatever little they require is also required once in 4 years. Rest is more of repairs and maintenance, because whenever the service sector contribution or exports are high, they require less bank credit, naturally, because their plowback of profits is high and they take advantage of it and they reinvest this money and they don't need any bank credit. In fact, if you ask what is the debt position of the IT and pharma companies, you may not be surprised to see big names like ITC, Dr. D's, Divi's, etc. having zero debt. Yes, Reliance is also zero, net debt zero. It is sitting on 2,20,000 crores debt. It is not debt free, it is net debt free. The 2,22,600 crores debt is still there in the books of Reliance. Parallelly, it has also cash reserves, which makes it a net debt zero company. But it's not debt zero company. Whereas most of the IT companies, be it TCS, Infosys, Cognizant, or any of these companies, or most of the pharma companies, they have zero debt. They have a lot of cash surplus to reinvest. So when you talk about the services sector, it will be very, very interesting to understand what is the bank credit pattern. And it goes on for a long time and will not have the sufficient logic to add to it also. Okay. This is the sectoral. I just spoke broadly, which is covered. Then I'll take you to this last slide. This explains sectoral resilience. What is high, what is medium, what is low. How many have recovered? Your leftmost corner is fully recovered. Rightmost corner is recovery is not in the visible future. It's still distant. What recovered most? Let me see. Let me read out. Gas distribution utilities, food supply, marine ports and services, and cement, dairy, FMCG, auto, telecom. It's more a pent-up revenge demand. You went to your ice cream shop and bought 4 ice creams at once. You went to your garment shop and bought 4 shirts, 10 shirts at once. All the days, what all you have saved, provided you have a safe employment and safe salary getting created into your bank account. You have shown how revengeous you could be, how fierce you could be in terms of purchasing to make up all the gap what you suffered sitting at home, listening to this kind of webinars only on digital modes. So because of these parameters, and also when the industry wheel starts moving, the specialty chemicals is one of the segment which has performed extremely well even during COVID time. Specialty chemicals, because it goes more into the technical textiles, it goes mostly into the pharmaceuticals, etc. Then what has been low in terms of recovery? Automotive dealers, gems and jewelry. You have no food to purchase. Sir has explained this part if you recollect. So when you have less money, you spend all on your bread loaves than on your makeup kit, etc., etc. I can't afford powder when I don't have food for my bread. So that goes without further explanation. And with this, I thank Professor Sir for making my job easier, and also Professor Kiranmai Madam, she's the mentor and senior professor, and Professor Dawar Sir, the Dean, and HOD Rabindranath Sir. Sir, I am done, sir. Now, any questions or anything we can take from SV, sir? I'm sure most of the questions will get answered by sir.
Hello, Kiran madam, would you like to please unmute yourself, ma'am? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Kishore, for a very informative presentation. Really, both the resource persons have shared tons of information with the participants. I think the researchers really might have been benefited with the presentation. The presentation of both the resource persons is very awesome. And Kishore, as I already told, we really enjoyed your background screen. We felt that we are also sitting on the seashore and hearing the lecture. Thank you very much, sir. Now, actually, I request Dr. Rabindranath, another resource person, to make his presentation. And after that, the session will be open for discussion. Dr. Rabindranath.
So, good evening, everybody. Now, after that very resourceful, very insightful, very factful and comprehensive explanation by Professor Satyanarayana Garu and Dr. N.K. Kishore, I don't think I'll have anything much more to add, because whatever data has been there has been presented. And the past data has been presented, the future data also is presented. So I don't think I'll have much more to speak, but then I'll just make a humble effort just to gather, because even I have certain things pent up in my mind. So I thought I will just share those things with the participants, with the permission of Professor S.V. Sir, who is my guru, and Dr. N.K. Kishore. I will start my presentation. Do I have your permission, sir?
Hi. Please.
Yes. Is my screen visible to the participants? Please, can one of you respond? I hope my screen is visible.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So, yeah. See, just this is only for the consumption of the basic participants. I have prepared these slides with the students who are participating in this webinar in mind. So the extremely knowledgeable resource persons and the extremely knowledgeable other participants might please excuse me if I'm giving you just the elementary and the basic information. So as you all are aware, the Indian economy is divided into three sectors: the primary sector, the secondary sector, and the tertiary sector. The primary sector is agriculture, fishing, mining, etc. The secondary sector is manufacturing and construction, while the tertiary sector comprises of tourism, banking, and software. Now, as you all are aware, the entire world has been plagued by the pandemic. There are different responses, different ways in which different countries have given the response or their preparedness for the pandemic. But in our country, I'm not saying we were the first to resort to any lockdowns or anything, but then we also have resorted to lockdowns. Now, in these lockdowns, we prepared, or rather we created what we called as zones. We said there were red zones, we said there were orange zones, and there were green zones. Now, red zones were those zones where the impact of the pandemic was felt high. So people within these zones, their movement was restricted. They had no access to the market, and they were just confined to their homes completely. to the extent that they were not even allowed to peep outside in certain localities. A comparatively better picture was there in the orange zones, where people were allowed certain access to the markets, but however, it was also restricted. Then in the green zones also, there was not very containment, so people were given certain free access. But then the percentage of access to the market, by what percent the red zone experienced restriction and effect on the access to market compared with the orange zone and the green zone, if you see, it was way different. In the red zone, 45.7% of the residents in that zone, they felt that their access to the market was restricted, while surprisingly, in the orange zone, 51.7% of them felt that there was a restriction in the access. So people in the orange zone, even though they were relatively free to move around, they experienced more restriction in their access to the market. In the same way, the perceived increase in the food grain, the change in the shopping behavior, and the experience of shock, the change in the consumption basket was different in each of these zones. But however, putting aside these zones, what were the general effects of the pandemic? The pandemic uprooted the lives of the common man completely. Now, they were people who were restricted within the confines of their houses, but they were people who lost their livelihoods. There were people who complained that they have got a limited choice of food. They are not allowed to go out to buy food. But there were people who had no food altogether. There were people who complained that they were put restrictions on their travel. But there were people who had no means of travel altogether. They had to walk down to their hometowns. There were millions of migrant workers who were left with no job the next day when they woke up. The government announced the lockdown, and the entire economic activity, the lives of the people, they actually came to a standstill. Such was the effect of the pandemic on the common man. The migrant workers, because they did not have access to any trains or buses or any other modes of transport, they had to walk thousands of miles back home. They did not have any other alternative. They just had to walk back, because if they remained at the place they had no income to sustain themselves. We may be having some bank balance, we may be having some savings, some earnings, but there are people who lead their lives by hand to mouth. Now, such people were affected, and they were very much affected by the pandemic. The middle class were affected by job losses. And small traders, they are the backbone of the economy. Now, these small traders were devastated. Their supply chain was hit. Now, these people, they do not have much of working capital. Whatever they have, with that, they will put a part of it aside for their personal consumption or for their personal needs. And then with that money, they will again go and buy their goods or their wares which they sell. And then they get on with their lives that way. Those people were devastated. Big retailers were also affected. These are the general effects of the pandemic. Now, when it comes to the industrial production and manufacturing percentage from 2018 to 2021, in the year 2017 and 18, it was 4.6%. Then it fell down to 3.9% in the year 18 and 19. And the corona pandemic stuck in the fag end of the year, that is in the month of November. So when the pandemic stuck, it stuck the year 19 and 20, where it went to minus 1.4%. And the industrial production and manufacturing percentage was the lowest in the year 20 and 21. This was a direct result of the pandemic playing its effect on the economy. So the resource persons before me have also have already shown you the contraction in the economy, how the economy contracted by 23.9% in the first quarter of 2021. And the growth rate in the manufacturing sector has plunged to minus 39.3 in the first quarter of 2021. The GDP fell by 7.3% in the fiscal year 2021. And according to a survey conducted by United Nations Industrial Development Organization, except for the rice milling sector, where production reportedly dropped by half, in manufacturing, some of the most affected industries have been metals and chemical products, motor vehicles, machinery and equipment, textiles, etc. These were the industries that were worst hit. So sector-wise impact, if you see, the impact of the pandemic on the primary sector, that is, we're talking specifically about agriculture. States up north, they experienced a decline in production. Chhattisgarh experienced a 13% decline in agricultural production, while Himachal Pradesh experienced a 15% decline in agricultural production. Surprisingly, in the state of Telangana, there was a 23% increase in the production, in agricultural production. Now, this was maybe because that by the time the pandemic set in, already the crop had been sown, and probably that is the reason why much effect also was not seen. So agriculture, we can say, overall has provided some cheer to us in the times of the pandemic. In the secondary sector, the pandemic landed a back-to-back blow on many economies in the Asian region in the year 2020. There was a huge drop in government income as industry and commerce slowed down. The government will earn its revenue when you spend. When you go to the market and purchase, when you go to the market, you fuel your scooter or your bike. You fill fuel into your bike. A part of it goes to the government. You buy certain commodities. It goes to the government in the form of sales tax. So when the day progresses, each activity that you undertake as an individual, as a company, as a firm, or as an entity, each activity that you undertake will benefit the government in the way of taxes. Now, when this activity came to a standstill, the government had much to lose. Telangana government, in a statement made, said that it lost 15,000 crores per day because of the lockdown. That is what the statement was made. So there was a significant hike in official expenditure because the government had to deal with health, the economic and the social fallout of the virus. The government cannot just shy away from its responsibility. It has to still go ahead and spend on the health sector. So the government spending did not come down. On the contrary, the government spending increased substantially, but the government revenues fell down substantially. So there was a crunch in the government. And one important thing which the resource persons before me also have pointed out was the excessive dependence on China for all the raw materials. The active pharmaceutical ingredients, it is the raw material used in the pharmacy company. Whatever goes into the final output, a major part of the raw material is to come from China. And then there was a complete breakdown in China. So our pharmaceutical company was greatly affected because of that. In electronics, 87% of the components are imported from China. In automobiles, 27% of the components are imported. Now, here we have seen that we found out that we depend more on the other countries for our own production. If we have to produce something, those raw materials, they have to come from the other countries. We have to import the raw materials. So India has become a country where you only are assembling the goods. You are only gathering all the factors and then you are coming out with the final output. But those inputs, those raw materials were not in your control. So this dealt a great blow to the manufacturing sector, be it electronics, be it automobiles, be it the consumer durables, and more specifically, the pharmaceutical industry was hit by this pandemic. The construction industry, as all of us know, that there was a mass exodus of migrant workers. The ongoing projects, the ongoing sites, they came to a standstill. The costs are piling up. Whatever was the project cost, the cost shot up. There were no buyers for the homes. And the construction industry came to a complete standstill, and all the migrant workers left the industry. They went back to their homes. So it was also very much hit. And it was a very painful recovery for the country. But however, if you look at the percentage of recovery, India's manufacturing activity fared very poorly compared with the services activity. So services activity fared actually very poorly comparing with the manufacturing activity as shown by the graph. So in conclusion, we can say the pandemic has hit almost every sector of the economy, and the recovering process is difficult at such times. Not only India, but the whole world is facing such an economic crisis. Let us hope that the Indian economy rises like a phoenix from the ashes. With this, I will end my presentation, and now I will open the session for question answers. If anybody has got any question to ask the resource persons, you can please ask your questions in the chat box. The resource persons will be very much willing to answer your questions. You can use the chat box, or in case you want to ask your questions, kindly raise your hand. I will unmute you. And I will unmute you. Do we have any questions, please? Now, may I request Kiranmai madam to conclude the session? Kiranmai ma'am. Kiranmai ma'am, kindly unmute yourself. Okay, there seems to be some technical problem. Now, with the permission of all the participants present, considering that there are no questions that can be asked, I will just check the chat box in case we have got any questions. I do not see any questions, only thanking all the participants, all the resource persons is what I see here. Because I do not have any questions. In case there are any questions, kindly ask me. Otherwise, with the permission of everybody present, I will now propose a formal vote of thanks. Okay, so with the permission of everybody present, I, on behalf of the Faculty of Commerce, and I on my own behalf, I thank Professor S.V. Satyanarayana Garu, who is such a busy person, and he has spent such a lot of time with us, gathered so much of information, and he has given us actually a wealth of knowledge today. Thank you, Professor Sir, for such a beautiful and such a very factful presentation that you have given us. Thank you so much. I also thank Dr. N.K. Kishore, who was with us and who has also given us a very excellent presentation and has given us the nuances of how the economy, how the pandemic has affected the economy. I thank Professor N.K. Kishore. And I also thank all the participants who have joined us in this webinar. And I hope that this webinar was really useful to you. Thank you so much.